So my name's Ian, and I'm going to talk about designing in a data-driven world. So it seems like more and more every day, data is being used to influence our lives. And in this world, I think it's important to look at how does data affect people's lives, and what does it mean for designers, for information architecture. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm Ian, again, and I work at a company called Amplitude. What Amplitude does is we create a product intelligence platform, and that's just like fancy speak for saying we help companies look at user behavior, look at their customer data, and make decisions based off of that. I've been working there for almost a year now, and I just wanted to talk about some of the experiences I've had working there and some of the observations from that. So back to that question about what does data mean for designers? So I wanted to bring up a study that Advision released in 2018 called the Design Maturity Model. And I think Lynn actually referenced this when she was answering questions. So it's funny how she was the first talk of the day, and now I'm the last talk, and we're circling back. And yeah, as she explained, this survey went out to 2,200 different companies and looked at how are the design teams in these companies making impact. And they ranked this kind of level of impact in 5 different categories, and they talked about what is different about these different categories and what is kind of making these up. So the 4th level of impact, which is the second most impactful, gotta make that number switch clear, was what they called the scientists. So these were designers that were using concept testing, A/B testing, and using analytics. And they were using this in a way that they could kind of measure their impact on their users and also use that to kind of drive understanding. And apparently this was like the second most impactful group. And when I read this in 2018, it definitely put a lot of questions in my mind. I would say as a designer, there's kind of like 2 parts to me. There's like a very like analytical and logical side of my brain, and there's like very like creative and very like empathetic side to it. And I would say this duality probably exists in a lot of designers. That's kind of why I wanted to get into design. And the quantitative side to it is something that I think in terms of what you learn in design school and what you end up practicing in the field, usually you don't really get to leverage that part of it. And I thought, hey, this is a really kind of this is an opportunity that I think designers can make more use of. So when I joined Amplitude, that's actually like one of the first reasons why I wanted to do that. I asked my manager in my interview, I said, hey, I see that you make this like analytical software. Do you guys make every decision based on the data you see? I also asked that question because I was a little afraid, because as I said, I really like this balance, and it's like, if you make every decision based on what you see in the numbers, that's probably bad. And she was flat out like, no, we don't do that, and you'll kind of see the nuances and how we do that if you join. So that's kind of some of the observations that I'm going to talk about, and kind of the first ones that I realized was that, yeah, you can't make every decision that you see just based on what some quantitative data will tell you. And I'll talk about a few examples for that. So one example I want to talk about is Spotify. So I'm guessing a lot of people know what Spotify is here. It's a music streaming platform, and I really like using Spotify because, I love listening to music, and I like finding new music. You can probably see me in the office, like I have my headphones on, like jamming, maybe going on sketch, doing stuff like that. But yeah, one great thing it does is it recommends you new music, and the way it does that is that it looks at kind of what's all the music that you've been listening to in the past, and based on that, it'll recommend you new playlists. So one problem with Spotify, I don't really say it's a problem even, but let's say in my case, so I actually share my account with my roommate, and he uses it when he's like working out at home, and he listens to some like really big like pump up music, some music that like I don't really like to listen to when I'm, for example, like driving in the morning. It's like 7 a.m. I'm like trying to be a little calm, and I can't really control what's going on in the music. So if we did everything based off that, it's not completely accurate because that data is based off of human behavior. It's not something you account for everything for. So I also like how Spotify, if a song comes up you don't like, or an artist comes up, I don't have anything against Ariana Grande, by the way. It's just a thank you next example I want to put up there. But yeah, you can say, I don't want to listen to this, or I do like this artist. So they realize, hey, it actually is really important that the end user has a say in kind of what the data is telling them. I also want to show that example from the flip side. So you also, as the designer, have to be able to interpret data and start to think about what to do with it. So this is a screenshot of the homepage of Amplitude, and I'm showing this because I was working on a project there where I was working on the homepage, and kind of our goal for the homepage was to figure out, okay, what are the most common flows and best practices that our users want to get to quickly in Amplitude. I think it's a pretty common problem when anybody goes to design a homepage. So this is one of my first projects, and I was thinking, okay, I could definitely use Amplitude to help me do this. We have a chart called Pathfinder. It's this crazy web of stuff. But what it's supposed to do, and I guess what it actually does, is that it tells you what are the most common paths that your users go through in your product. So just a bit about how Amplitude works. Each kind of path is made up of events, and how that works is, let's say you are a food delivery app. So DoorDash is one of our customers, and when somebody makes an order on DoorDash, when that order comes in, when the order arrives, we kind of log each of those kind of events. And in Amplitude, you can do analysis on that. So you could say, okay, when my user clicked the order button, what different things were in the shopping cart, what were they looking at before? So that's how Amplitude kind of comes out with this analysis. It says, hey, what are the steps that people have taken before and after, and what are the common ones? So yeah, you can imagine as a designer, I was like, hey, I can just use this chart. It's going to tell me what's the most common things people do in the homepage, and it's going to do the work for me. But I was totally wrong about that. All it did was really just show what are the weird things people do, what's the most common paths, not necessarily what is the best path for our users to take according to what problems they have. I don't think you can see it from here, but the top kind of blue wave is the most common thing that people do, and basically you can see it's just people who just hit the search button over and over again. There are things like hitting the help button. The second most thing, people just open the sidebar. I mean, obviously because you want to access things, but then I'm not going to get much about opening the sidebar in terms of what are the best paths that my users can take. So yeah, basically from this, I realized, yeah, I can't use this chart to tell me everything, and it's really important for us as designers to really understand what are the common paths we have, and to really separate the signal from the noise there. Yeah, so that's kind of just the first part of that observation. I'll build on this a little more, but yeah, you can't make every decision based on what the data tells you. You still need people, you still need the designers to figure out what that intent and what to do with that. It also parallels to what Lynn was saying in terms of, as the designers, we're the ones who have to go do and make decisions based off of that. Okay, so what can we do with the data as designers? Well, I would actually say that data is just another piece of feedback, and it's what really helps us start investigating and understand people. Like I said with that example I said, that Pathfinder chart said a lot of people are going to help, so that might be a red flag of what problems exist right now. And I think when you look at data as a piece of feedback, there's a really kind of interesting relationship that qualitative data and quantitative data have with each other. And I'm going to talk through kind of this relationship. So I'll talk more about this homepage project, and talk about how the qualitative information I was finding kind of fed into some quantitative findings. So when I was working on this homepage project, we were interviewing a lot of newer users on Amplitude. And a common pain point they kept talking about was saying, hey, where are my charts? They were creating a lot of content and things like Amplitude, and they had no idea how to find it. And it was interesting bringing up this problem to kind of my PMs and kind of proposing it as something to work with, because we got some mixed responses. Some people were saying, oh yeah, this is a big problem. Other people were saying, well, they're just like newer users, they'll figure it out. It's not something that's really important for us to focus on. So I was thinking about, okay, how can we actually dig into this and figure out, is this really just a problem with our new users? And I was able to kind of dig into some quantitative data to figure out, oh, okay, it's not just with our new users. I was looking at when people use our search, and our search is like meant to just, you can search through everybody's piece of content, but basically like most of our users were just using it to search for themselves. And that was a big red flag of like, hey, okay, not just novice users have this problem, but everybody is just like using our search to just search for themselves. And it gave us that conviction to say, hey, this is a problem that affects a lot more people. So the quantitative on this side really helped us to surface up, hey, this is not just a trivial problem, and this is something that we should focus on in a wider use case. Then talking about how the quantitative flows into the qualitative side of things. I'll also talk about this homepage example. So we ended up creating this section called My Workspace. And I mean, it's kind of like in Google Drive, there's like a recent section that just shows, hey, here's all the recent stuff that you were working on. It's pretty, like, I think, straightforward way of solving the problem. And I wanted to dig into this more and see, what kind of feedback were we getting from customers who were using this feature. So I ended up thinking, is there a way for me to talk to users who like, I call it here dormant users, but users who like tried it out once and never came back. Maybe like the average user who just like might use it a few times a week, and then a power user who might be using it a lot more. I ended up being able to dig into, okay, how often are people accessing charts from this section, and was able to use that to split out these different user groups. Yeah, this is really interesting to me because I think in the past, in a lot of user research I've done, it's like really based off demographic data. So it might be, what industry are they in, what age group, things like that. But this was just like purely based on how are they using that feature, and can we like identify those different kinds of users. Yeah, so from there, I was able to talk to a bunch of different kinds of users. Based off of, if they tried an average amount of times or more than average. And I found some like really different problems among these kinds of users. So for users that had tried it and never came back, obviously like education was a huge part of why they kind of didn't understand the feature. So for our average users, they're interested in like seeing kind of other ways of categorizing the content. And for our power users, they were like using this section more than like 10 times a week, and they wanted to actually like have more ways to manage all their stuff. And then we ended up working on like some new education cues for it and like different ways to filter that data. Yeah, so kind of circling back, it's just saying that quantitative data, it's something that can help us see our users maybe in a new perspective and really just lead to new questions. But when you're doing that, just like when I started talking to these different users from filtering down, it's important to remember that these numbers you're seeing are real people, and it's the biggest thing is really just digging into that and understanding what the different problems are according to that. So that's my second observation. Just it's another piece of feedback, and data can help you investigate and understand people. So taking this kind of take on what does quantitative data mean, I also wanted to relate it to kind of information architecture. Obviously we're here. And I think it's just the same kind of sense. I think there's a lot of talk around, is information architecture something that doesn't really exist as a field anymore, different things like that. And this conference talks about it's all elemental, and it's data is just another piece of feedback that applies to information architecture, and it just helps us inform how to organize information for people. I'm going to talk through a kind of traditional information architecture framework to give an example of this. So this is the Latch framework by Robert Solomon, and Yeah, actually his book is the one that's being raffled out, so that's funny that it's also part of this. But yeah, I'm going to use the latch framework to talk through that. And basically, the way the latch framework works is that the whole idea is that any information, if you want to organize it for people, there's only 5 ways you can organize it. It's either by location, alphabet, time, category key, or hierarchy. I'll walk through a little example of that. So let's say you're working on some kind of like restaurant app, like Yelp, for example, and really what Yelp is just a tool to organize a whole bunch of restaurants, and your problem is you want to organize restaurants in the Los Angeles area. Okay. So I might get a piece of qualitative information from the people that are using it. Maybe they're here in Pasadena, and they're saying, okay, I only really use this app during dinner because, you know, I'm usually eating lunch and I work out of the Pasadena outside of this area, and I usually bring my lunch to the office. So I might start to think, okay, how can I organize all this restaurant information to make it more useful for these people? So I might think about, okay, why don't we think about location first? So like I said, these people only use the app during dinner time, and they mostly are in Pasadena point. So what if we just organize things by neighborhood? We could just focus that restaurant list into the Pasadena area. And then I might think about a layer of time on top of that. So they said, okay, they only are really looking for dinner time. So that might be another layer of organization we might do on top of this. We might try to organize by the opening time, or maybe by the meal time, maybe just by dinner. So when I look into maybe how the quantitative can help with this, I think, you know, you can also use it as evidence. I think similar to my previous use case, to figure out, okay, is this something really true with all my users? And yeah, I might find that maybe 80% of the time, users are only really checking the app at dinner time in Pasadena, and this will really give me conviction to say, hey, okay, these are the kind of people that I am organizing my information towards, and I should really focus towards that. That might be my little light bulb moment that will teach me that. But it also might lead to other questions. So what about the other 20% of people? How do I design for them? What kind of use cases exist for them? And it kind of just brings up, I think, what I was talking about earlier, is that this evidence, this data, it really just leads to more questions and just more like interesting things that, as a designer, you might dig into and try to figure out what to do with and try to find the opportunity from. So overall, some of the observations that kind of brought up today is that you can't make every decision based on data. We need to decide what to do with it. And for designers, data, I guess here I'm really talking about quantitative data, is just another feedback from people. And that can really lead to new questions and just helps us figure out, you know, how do we organize things for our users. So I want to leave you all today with this survey that actually came out to our company. So John Cutler is a big product thinker that works at Amplitude, and he asked our company, one that, you know, works on a data tool, what phrase do you connect with the most in terms of data-driven, data-informed, evidence-driven, and evidence-informed? And you might be surprised to see that the answer to this question was, the second one was the most popular by far. Data-informed was the #1 kind of phrase that people connected with. And I would say, like, if I was going to do one thing today in this talk, like, this is the whole point of it. I think there's a whole narrative around data-driven and how that's making every decision, and that's the things that we should follow. But it's really important for our role as designers, just for people who are shaping the future of the world, to think about it as data-informed and think about who are the users and the people that is affected by these experiences. Thanks, everyone. Any questions out there?
Hello. Hi, thanks so much for your talk. That was great. Sorry. So my question is really about, you made a great point, right, about going from data-driven to data-informed. And I'm interested to hear about that pivoting moment, like, because something has to happen as far as when you realize, okay, we can't no longer be just data-driven. You know, that nuance, like, can you talk a little bit about that?
From like my perspective, or what do you mean by that?
Or maybe, sure, we can go from your perspective.
Yeah, I guess it just comes from, I think from what I shared, some like personal moments, and from what you, I think from what you see there, where yeah, you might try things by like super data-driven way, and then you realize that there's so much more elements to it. I also think that there's I think maybe a lot of people think they're making things like purely like data-driven, but then I think just because the nature of like how people are and just what you do with it, like I think in truth, like no one's making purely data-driven decisions, and that it's really about data-informed and like how you frame that and how you talk about that. So I think it's also kind of like a name that thing, like name it, and like it's actually how it is in reality kind of thing. Yeah.
I was wondering, so in case you have like coworkers who are strictly, data-driven and they want to see numbers to back it up, how do you convince them that numbers aren't everything and it's better to be data-informed, because then you don't really have like numbers to prove that being data-informed may be better?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. I would say, so we all like go back to some like design superpowers. So I would say one of the design superpowers is being able to create vision and show to people what things will look like. So I think that's one kind of thing I lean towards, is like, if we make a decision based on that, like here's what that might look like, and try to kind of use that a way to make that point or show that. Yeah.
Hi, so I think you raised the interesting question towards the end, was like data-driven, data-informed, and versus evidence-driven and evidence-informed. And I wanted to ask how you differentiate between data and evidence, because I know some people see data as evidence.
Yeah. Those are really deep questions. I was not expecting. So, just so you know, this is all my opinion. Okay, so I think the difference maybe between data and evidence, I think it comes down to the context of things. So what problem am I solving? What is like the purpose of why I'm looking at this piece of data? I think that's when it becomes evidence, when you're able to put that into context and like understand how it comes to prove a point, or it comes to like show that a problem exists. Yeah, I think that's how I would start talking about it.
Okay. I just want to bounce off a little bit. I do agree with the idea that data is like a piece of evidence, or like a piece of something to work off of with. Whereas evidence is kind of like proof, and it's like a causation almost. So it makes sense to me that it's data is a piece of information, and it's kind of like a piece of a bigger picture. And then part of design is trying to piece together those different points of data to come up with a bigger narrative, if you will, or like the bigger vision of the idea that helps to kind of connect with people, I think. So.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm curious on when somebody takes this data-informed approach, how would you help help someone who takes that from swinging kind of the other way, from taking the anecdotal pieces and treating it as more important than or like throwing out some of the hard data to say, well, we saw this one thing even though it didn't compare against the bigger, we know that those bigger numbers weren't as important, so we want to inform ourselves from this one, and now it outweighs maybe the way we should approach it.
Yeah, I think in the examples I showed, it's really being able to balance that. That's kind of why I want to talk a lot about the kind of qualitative or more, what would be more anecdotal, and also the quantitative side of things. So can we actually, like, I think, if you're going to throw those things out, it's kind of a offense to do that. You need to like balance the whole picture and see, which voices are, because in doing that, you're actually minimalizing a lot of voices. There's something called like the vocal minority of maybe a small enough group of people that, in the B2B business, we get that a lot. We have like a few small customers who like really push for something, but then we kind of use the data to keep us in check and say, hey, this is actually a very small, small group of customers that aren't seeing the bigger picture. So I think it helps with that. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. So you brought up Spotify in terms of the data that they're getting from your listening and your roommates listening. But what do you think about the further algorithm that for Spotify, the Discover Weekly, it aggregates the data from someone else who actually listens to similar music as you and makes the recommendations based off of their listening history and thinking, hey, you guys listen to the same things, so if you're a power user of Spotify, you're the one who's actually informing the playlists of other people. So how does that feel to you in terms of either data-informed or evidence-informed work?
I hadn't thought about that one. These are some really good questions. Okay. I'll just tell you what's coming out of my brain right now. So, I've been doing some work where we're trying to use these kind of algorithms to predict maybe what kind of analysis someone else is going to do based off someone else. And it's been interesting being in that kind of context because it's I think those are just different, those are different means to try to use data in order to inform you. And I would say still as a role as a designer, it's how do you shape how this algorithm is being used to kind of show you how that represents itself. I think so for one example is, Netflix, for example, right? They might give you a percent score of this movie we recommend to you. I think there might be some interesting intersection there where designers can show, oh hey, this is actually how this algorithm is created. Here's how that is generated, and maybe using that can also kind of inform the end user, kind of show them, oh, this is how we're doing it, and maybe from there they can understand, oh, this is why something was recommended to me, and can maybe help and just inform users a bit more. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rita, and I wanted to say thank you very much because I have never considered the data-informed versus data-driven, because like you said, so many companies now, you pull up anybody's website and it says, we're a data-driven company. But I think what at least resonated with me and what you were saying and kind of relates to this whole Spotify question too, is regardless of what the data is saying, it seems like there's this ethical line that we as humans and we as the custodians or protectors of this information make sure that we're continuing to use the data for good and keeping the context of the limitations of the data. So especially like when we're providing suggested recommendations or lookalike audiences, especially when it comes to hiring or identifying future candidates for a company, understanding the limitations of those data. So I guess it's not really a question so much as I thought that was a very unique point that you made that's a huge takeaway. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's something I didn't really touch on as much, the ethical side of things, and like I'm not super informed about that, but I think we can see it like with with Facebook, kind of like the news algorithm they use and all that. There's so much in that field that's being explored, and I actually talked to a designer that works on Facebook who is working on that specific part of how does the news algorithm work, and there's some like really crazy work being there between like designers and like CIA like information experts and about like, okay, how do you approach propaganda, how do you approach that, and if you're interested in that, I think that's another place, like designers are needed, and it's a huge problem, and like it's gonna keep going on. Thank you, everybody.